When Emily is abruptly fired without warning by her boss, Marcus, she feels her world crumbling, until the unexpected arrival of the company's CEO, Robert Caldwell. As Robert discovers Emily's distraught son, who had been waiting for her in the next room, he realizes the gravity of Marcus's cold-hearted actions. A confrontation ensues, revealing a hidden truth about Emily that Marcus had completely overlooked. Robert decides to step in, and the consequences of Marcus's cruelty begin to unfold. What happens next will turn everything upside down and offer Emily a chance she never imagined. But before we dive in, leave a comment and let us know where you are watching from today. And if this story speaks to you, hit that subscribe button for more amazing stories. In the sleek, modern office of Brookhaven Enterprises, the air was thick with tension. The glass walls offered a panoramic view of the bustling city below, but inside, the atmosphere was anything but tranquil. Marcus Hale, the company's regional director, sat behind his polished mahogany desk, his expression cold and indifferent. He was in his mid-40s, his dark hair impeccably styled, and his tailored suit giving him an air of power that he wielded with relish. Across from him stood Emily Parker, a young employee in her early 30s, her face pale as she tried to comprehend what was happening. Emily had worked tirelessly for the company for the past 5 years, pouring her heart into every project, staying late, and sacrificing weekends. But none of that seemed to matter now. "Your performance has been underwhelming," Marcus said, his voice dripping with condescension as he leaned back in his chair. "It's time we part ways. You're no longer needed here." Emily's heart sank, her mouth going dry. "Mr. Hale, please, if there's something I did wrong, I can fix it. Just give me a chance." Marcus waved his hand dismissively. "This is not up for debate. Consider this your final day." Tears welled up in Emily's eyes, but she blinked them back, refusing to give Marcus the satisfaction of seeing her break. She took a deep breath, nodding slowly. "I understand," she whispered, her voice trembling. As she turned to leave, Marcus's phone buzzed on the desk, and he glanced at the screen, his expression shifting to one of annoyance. "Great, just what I need," he muttered under his breath. Emily walked out of the office, her legs feeling like lead. She headed toward her desk to gather her things, her mind racing. She had given everything to this job, and in return, she had been cast aside without a second thought. She took a shaky breath, trying to maintain her composure as her colleagues glanced at her sympathetically, whispering among themselves. Meanwhile, in the lobby of Brookhaven Enterprises, a tall, distinguished-looking man stepped out of the elevator. He was in his late 50s, his hair graying at the temples, but his presence commanded respect. His name was Robert Caldwell, and he was the CEO of the entire company, a man known for his fairness and for taking a personal interest in the well-being of his employees. Robert had decided to pay an unannounced visit to the regional office to get a sense of how things were running. He believed in seeing things firsthand, not just through reports and numbers. As he walked down the hallway, he noticed Emily standing by her desk, her eyes red as she packed her belongings into a cardboard box. Robert paused, his brow furrowing. He recognized Emily. He had met her at a company event last year. She had impressed him with her dedication and innovative ideas. Something was clearly wrong. "Emily," Robert called, his voice gentle but concerned. Emily looked up, her eyes widening in surprise. "Mr. Caldwell," she managed, her voice barely above a whisper. Robert approached her, his gaze softening as he took in her distraught expression. "What's going on here?" he asked, glancing at the box in her hands. Emily hesitated, unsure of what to say. She didn't want to make things worse, but the hurt and frustration were too much to keep inside. "Mr. Hale, he just fired me," she said, her voice breaking slightly. Robert's eyes narrowed, a flash of anger crossing his face. "Fired you? Without warning?" he asked, his voice hardening. Emily nodded, her eyes cast downward. "He said my performance was underwhelming." Robert clenched his jaw, his mind already racing with questions. He had reviewed Emily's performance reports before, and they had always been positive. He knew there was more to this story, and he intended to find out what. "Wait here," Robert said, his voice firm. "I'm going to speak with Mr. Hale." Robert made his way down the hallway, his footsteps echoing against the polished floor. He reached Marcus's office, pushing the door open without bothering to knock. Marcus looked up, startled, his eyes widening when he saw who had just entered. "Mr. Caldwell," Marcus stammered, quickly rising from his chair. "I wasn't expecting you today." Robert's eyes were cold as he stepped into the office, closing the door behind him. "Clearly," he said, his tone clipped. "I just spoke with Emily Parker. She tells me you fired her, without warning." Marcus shifted uncomfortably, trying to maintain his composure. "Well, yes, sir. Her performance has been below our standards, and I felt it was time to make a change." Robert studied Marcus for a long moment, his expression unreadable. "Below our standards," he repeated, his voice low. "From what I recall, Emily has been one of our most dedicated employees. I've seen her work firsthand, and I've reviewed her reports. There's nothing underwhelming about her performance." Marcus swallowed hard, his face paling. I just thought," he began, but Robert cut him off. "No, Marcus. You didn't think," Robert said, his voice filled with barely contained anger. "You acted without considering the impact of your actions. Do you understand the kind of dedication it takes for someone like Emily to work here, day in and day out, giving her all to this company?" Marcus opened his mouth to respond, but Robert held up a hand, silencing him. "You fired her without cause, and you did it without considering the consequences. That's not how we treat our people." Just as Robert was about to continue, there was a knock on the door, and it opened to reveal a young boy, no older than 7, standing hesitantly in the doorway. He had sandy blonde hair and wore a school uniform, his backpack slung over one shoulder. His eyes were wide as he looked between Marcus and Robert. "Mom," the boy said softly, his voice trembling. "Mom, are you done yet?" Marcus's eyes widened in shock, and Robert turned, his expression softening as he looked at the boy. "What's your name, son?" Robert asked, his tone gentle. "Charlie," the boy replied, glancing nervously at Marcus. "I was waiting for my mom, Emily." Robert's heart sank as the realization hit him. He turned back to Marcus, his expression now filled with a mix of disbelief and fury. "You fired Emily," he said slowly, "without even considering that she has a child?" Marcus was at a loss for words, his face turning a deep shade of red. He had no idea that Emily had a son, and he certainly hadn't expected the boy to be in the next room, waiting for his mother while she faced this heartless dismissal. Robert took a deep breath, turning to Charlie. "Come in, Charlie. Let's go find your mom," he said kindly. The boy nodded, stepping into the office. Robert glanced at Marcus one last time, his expression filled with disappointment. "We'll talk about this later, Marcus. And trust me, there will be consequences." Robert led Charlie out of the office, guiding him down the hallway until they reached Emily's desk. Emily looked up, her eyes widening when she saw her son. "Charlie," she said, her voice breaking as she knelt down, wrapping her arms around him. "Mom," Charlie whispered, his voice filled with emotion. "I was scared." Emily held him tightly, tears streaming down her face. "It's okay, sweetheart. Everything's going to be okay." Robert stood by, watching the scene with a heavy heart. He couldn't believe that Marcus had been so callous, so blind to the reality of Emily's situation. He knew he had to make things right. "Emily," Robert said softly, and she looked up, her eyes filled with tears. "I want to apologize for what happened. You should never have been treated that way." Emily nodded, her voice trembling. "Thank you, Mr. Caldwell." Robert took a deep breath, his expression determined. "I'd like you to stay with Brookhaven Enterprises," he said. "In fact, I want you to come work directly for me. We need people like you. People who are dedicated, hard-working, and willing to give their all." Emily's eyes widened in shock. "Work for you?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Robert nodded, a small smile on his face. "Yes. I've seen your work, and I know your potential. I want you on my team." Emily blinked back tears, unable to believe what she was hearing. After everything that had happened, after the humiliation of being fired, here she was, being offered a new opportunity, one she had never even dreamed of. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice filled with emotion. "Thank you so much, Mr. Caldwell." Robert smiled, his gaze shifting to Charlie. "And Charlie, don't worry. Your mom's going to be just fine." Charlie nodded, a small smile spreading across his face as he hugged his mother tightly. Later that day, Marcus sat alone in his office, the door closed and the blinds drawn. His heart pounded as he replayed Robert's words in his head. He knew that his actions had consequences, serious ones. He had made a rash decision, one based on arrogance and a complete disregard for the people who made Brookhaven Enterprises what it was. A knock at the door startled him, and Robert stepped in, his expression stern. Marcus stood, his shoulders slumping. "Mr. Caldwell, Sit down, Marcus," Robert said, his tone leaving no room for argument. Marcus sank back into his chair, swallowing hard. "Effective immediately, you're being placed on probation," Robert said, his voice cold. "I want you to take a hard look at how you've been running things here. If there's any chance of you keeping your position, you're going to need to prove that you can change. Starting now." Marcus nodded, his face pale. "I understand, sir." Robert gave him a long, hard look before turning and leaving the office without another word. As the sun began to set over the city, Emily sat at her desk, now empty of her personal belongings. She watched as Charlie played quietly with his toys, a sense of peace washing over her. She had been ready to walk away, to leave everything behind, but now she had a new beginning, a chance to work with Robert Caldwell, a man who valued people, who saw the worth in every employee. She took a deep breath, her heart swelling with gratitude. Things had changed so quickly, but in the end, she knew that she was stronger for it. She had faced the worst and had come out on the other side, not broken, but whole. As she looked at her son, she smiled. "We're going to be okay, Charlie," she whispered. "We're going to be just fine." Charlie looked up at her, his eyes bright. "I know, Mom," he said, his voice filled with confidence. And in that moment, Emily knew he was right.